I think we're ready to start. Welcome to the Sandwich Club. I hope you had some nice treats. Just a quick word, we're doing this lecture in English. We do have a few English speakers, but mainly because we're taping it for our LivePerson developers YouTube channel. So anyone that wants to see it can see it worldwide, so that's why it's in English. I hope that's not too uncomfortable. And my name is Yaron Karasik, part of the mobile team at LivePerson. And we're going to talk about mobile SDKs, considerations, and best practices. So a little bit about me, Yaron Karasik, Green Whale on Twitter, if anyone wants to follow. I've been an iOS developer for the last 4 years. Last year and a half at LivePerson. And before that, I was an independent developer working with a bunch of startups, helping them put together their iOS apps. So I've seen a variety of different projects, as well as the SDK that we're working on at LivePerson. So yeah, I've been, as I mentioned, I've been at LivePerson for the last year and a half. Part of the mobile team that's really growing now at LivePerson. It's something that we really want to put a big emphasis on as we go along. And I'm based in New York. Some of our team's in New York and some of us in Israel. So I'm here for a quick visit for 2 weeks. So happy to take this chance and give this lecture. How many of you are not from LivePerson? Nice. So we have a few guests. So a little bit about LivePerson. We're one of the leading companies in the world of digital engagement and chat. We started really from the world of chat. If you visit many of the biggest e-commerce or service providers around the world, telecom companies, big online stores, and you chat with customer support, you chat with live agents, LivePerson is powering all of that. We really power a very large number of chats around the world. And we're really moving from the world of live chat into what we call digital engagement, which is really to analyze your behavior on the website of these e-commerce and support sites, and really offer you the best ways to communicate with the website. Chat is obviously one of those channels, but we're also talking about offering you various different other types of interactions. It could be a different interaction channel like voice or video or anything else. It could be offering you specific content that's specific to your flow in the website. And we definitely, our new product is called LiveEngage. It was launched earlier in 2014. And now being used by a lot of SMB customers. Anyone can try it. Anyone can download a trial and put it on their website and use it for chat and for the various campaigns and engagements that we offer on the site. We're also really focused on mobile right now. We have a mobile SDK, which is what we're going to talk about right now. Also releasing a few apps into the market. So this is something that we're very interested in. So what is a mobile SDK? What are we talking about here? A mobile SDK is basically a precompiled static framework or library that you can add to your mobile application. It could be iOS, Android, a different operating system, and it basically provides you with a very large set of functionality that you can use inside your app automatically without having to write any of the code yourself. How many of you have used any mobile SDKs, have integrated any of them into an application? Okay, nice, not too many. So the first question is why, before we go into a lot of the technical and more product aspects, I wanted to start with some of the business aspects. Why would you even build a mobile SDK? Why is it something that you would do? So one is really to offer a mobile-specific service. And ever since mobile has become like such a big part of the industry, part of the tech industry over the last 7 or 8 years, there's been a bunch of companies that have really looked at this opportunity, looked at the huge number of apps that are in the various app stores, and said, well, we want to let's take this opportunity. Let's offer a mobile-specific service that app developers can integrate into their app. And it's a wonderful business opportunity. So Urban Airship offers digital engagement and push notifications. They're kind of in the same space that LivePerson is. Mixpanel, Flurry, Localytics are analytics company that really went mobile first. Some of them are moving into the web space from there, but they really started with mobile. Crashlytics started with really offering you crash reports. One of the things you really want to avoid in your apps is crashes, and you definitely want to collect as much information as you can about these crashes. That's Crashlytics. Hockey App, TestFlight are distribution platforms. And Parse offers a platform as a service that you can easily use, build an app without building your own backend. They really give you a backend right out of the box. Layer is another LivePerson competitor because they offer chat and various forms of interaction inside your app. They're still a little different. We might talk about that later. And Firebase is this very interesting platform for real-time real-time updates and information to your app, similar to Parse in that you get like this free backend for your app, but much more real-time than Parse. And you can see these little icons. TestFlight was bought by Apple a couple years ago, Firebase by Google, Parse was purchased by Facebook, Crashlytics was purchased by Twitter, Hockey App by Microsoft. So this is really a very hot market. Maybe it's already a little bit past its prime, but definitely a lot of interesting opportunities here. So these are all companies that went after mobile offering a specific service, and they're all really, really strong players in the market today. On the other hand, you have all these companies that were around before mobile. They offered an existing service, and the best way to get customers to use it on mobile, to integrate them into their app, is to offer this SDK. Instead of having a developer all these companies have APIs, but instead of having the developer work against that API, do a lot of work to integrate it into their app, they'll definitely run into a lot of problems. They'll do it not in an optimal way. They'll face a lot of the challenges we're going to discuss today. So if you're Amazon, if you're Spotify, if you're PayPal, Google Analytics, Facebook, Twitter, if you give this code base to your developers, you can ensure that they integrate it into their app using the best practices, the best way, without a lot of effort, and that way you get your services used by mobile app developers. With Facebook and Twitter, I think it's a great example because if you look at Facebook's earnings are growing right now, and everything is almost based on mobile app installs. That's like their biggest model, to advertise apps in your feed and get you to install them. And the monetization of that works only if you use the Facebook SDK. So they have they want you to really integrate that into your app so they can make sure that their monetization is working. And I think they're doing, if anyone used that, they're doing a very good job at that. Twitter saw Facebook and is doing the same thing. They bought a few companies like Crashlytics and a few others, and really offering a very similar SDK that they hope will drive monetization. LivePerson, pretty much the same. We've been around before mobile. We have a chat API. If a developer wants to integrate chat into their app or some of our new services, there are APIs for that. But it's very hard. Building a chat app, even if you have all the APIs, is a lot of work. There's a lot of UI involved. There's a lot of networking edge cases. And if we can just provide something that they can integrate and instantly use, it definitely will help adoption of our platform in mobile and eventually help us business-wise. So just a quick little demo of what our SDK does. This is pretty simple, and it's a little bit slow because I taped it on the simulator. But our SDK is integrated inside of your app. This is just an example of an e-commerce app. And we monitor your visit. We monitor every visitor that comes onto your website, and you get reports for that, and you see exactly which visitors are on your website. We have this overlay that pops up over your app and offers you this engagement channel, this chat. Right now, I'm filling out a survey. You can customize any sort of survey that you want, collect information about your visitor before you start. And then you're answered by an operator, and you can start chatting with him. You can still interact with the app. It'll go that way in a second. You can background the chat. You can interact with the app as much as you like. And so what we really did here is not just offer an SDK that has these endpoints where you can create engagements and chats, but really build an entire UI. It's sort of this little app. I'm not going to show everything here, but we have various different models that add onto it, and it's really a complete interaction platform within your app. And we've seen some really big customers adopt it and put it into their apps, and it's very cool. So just sending a message. We have this little keyboard menu. Under it, you can email the chat transcript. You can upload photos. And anytime, you can really background this chat and just continue to navigate the app. You have this little button where you can go back. And we'll talk about it later, but we offer a lot of customizability around that. So as I mentioned, app developers are a really well-defined target market and a business model. So if any of you guys have a business idea, if you have an existing API that you want to bring to market, this is really a great thing to do. And what we're really going to do right now is dive into all the considerations that you need to take into consideration when building a mobile SDK. So we've been doing this for about 3 years. We've had the SDK in the market. We've run into as you can imagine, we've run into a lot of different issues. We've had a lot of things that weren't optimal, and we've learned a lot from that. And I'm really going to go into a lot of all of these different issues. Some of them are more business, some of them are more product, a lot of them are more technical. And this is definitely like a really good checklist to take into consideration if you're going to be building your app soon. Before I dive into the considerations, any questions so far? Cool. OK. So question for you guys. Anyone who's integrated a native SDK or any SDK at all, how much time do you think you have to really get a developer to integrate the SDK into your app? Anyone?
10 minutes?
Definitely. So if someone said 5 minutes, someone said 10 minutes. Why do you think it's such a small number?
1 week.
Sorry?
1 week. It's there to help you, not to give you more work.
Exactly. So I said 5 minutes. If a developer can't integrate your SDK in 5 minutes, they're just going to use something else. As we saw before, that was just like a very short list of examples of SDKs that exist for, and there's one for everything. There's a ton of analytics APIs. There are a lot of chat SDKs, and developers, they can Google analytics SDK. They'll try one of them. If they can't integrate it in 5 minutes, they'll just find something else to use. So one of the most important things is to really, and we'll talk about that more in depth, is to really have a very smooth integration process, and definitely not cause any problems or issues for the developer. And there's a ton of things, a ton of gotchas, a ton of things that you really need to notice if you want to be able to integrate your SDK in 5 minutes. Another question for you guys. What's the easiest way for a developer to solve an SDK-related problem, even if it...
Copy-paste.
What do you mean copy-paste?
Look it up in Google and copy the solution.
That's a little harder than... Yes, exactly. Thank you, Renan. So the easiest way is to just delete the SDK. And I think anyone who's done this has been there. If you see one issue, like the tolerance level of these people, of us, I'm one of them, is 0. Like if there's any issue, if anything that, any unexpected behavior, anything that you don't want to happen, you're just going to delete the SDK immediately. So it's really like one strike and you're out. You really have to be careful with what you're doing. And that's some of the things that we're going to be talking about. There's a ton of visibility with this stuff. The developer can see anything, like everything that your SDK is doing. The end users can see this stuff. So it's really up to the SDK developer to be super sensitive about this and do everything right. On the other hand, there's a really good opportunity here because once you do integrate the SDK, once you have it in the App Store, once the developer has it in the App Store, he's not going to switch to something else. He's already collected data there. If it's an analytics API, he's already got, if it's LivePerson, he's already got agents answering chats. He's already committed to it. Obviously, there's also business commitments. So if you can make it easy to integrate, if you can get the developer to put it in those 5 minutes, then you really have like a customer that's going to be paying you for a long time or using your SDK for a long time. So the most important thing to remember in this aspect is your SDK is a guest in the host app. And like a guest, you definitely don't want to leave a mess there. And you really have to pay attention to everything that you're doing and be super careful about that. So some of the points that we're going to dive into and discuss today, one of them is really minimum use of resources. With mobile, everything is about resources. This laptop here, it's connected to the Wi-Fi. It's connected to the power network. It's got a ton of RAM. I can run a bunch of apps on it. I can do anything I want. I don't care. Someone who's developing an app for a Mac doesn't really have to worry about those things. But when you're developing for mobile, resources is pretty much everything. What's the most frustrating thing that happens to you on your phone?
Battery.
Exactly. Everyone hates when your battery runs out. And all of us know exactly which apps are doing that. And it's really something that we'll talk about that later, but it's really something that's easy to notice and to get mad about. Battery is one of them. Cellular data. If you look at the business models of network operators today, it's all about you're paying for data. You're paying for how much data you're going to be using on your phone. And it's expensive. In Israel, it's pretty, like with all the revolutions that have happened lately, it's pretty cheap. But in the US, you pay like $60 for 3 gigabytes of data. So you definitely want to make sure that you're not the one that's going to cause the end user of your customer, of the developer that's integrating your SDK, to pay more money for data. So definitely really want to be careful about that. Memory. These devices have a limited amount of memory. And if you look at iOS especially, any app that's using too much memory is going to get kicked out and shut down. So it's definitely something you want to pay attention to. Maximum compatibility. When you design your own app, you can really do whatever you want. You're in charge. You're submitting the final binary to the Google Play Store, to Apple Store. you're controlling everything. But when you're talking about your developer, he can do whatever he wants. He can target the app for just tablets, just phones together. He can target old versions of the operating system. He can pretty much do whatever you want. And if you want to make sure that he's going to use your SDK, you have to be compatible with almost anything. There's definitely, you don't want to go crazy. There's definitely, you need to set your limits to whatever makes sense, but definitely something that you need to pay attention to. Easy to integrate and use. I think we talked about that before. It's got to be something that you can really integrate in 5 minutes, and we'll talk about how you can do that in a bit. And then there's another question that's something that we've put a lot of thought into at LivePerson. Do you provide your own UI? Most SDKs don't do that. They give these endpoints to the developers to implement, and they don't want to do their own UI because it's kind of intrusive. Look and feel is something that's very important in the app, and you don't want to really take it over. On the other hand, if it's something that's really related to UI, and you do find a way to offer your own UI, it's something that could be like a really huge benefit, because at the end of the day, that's what the SDK is doing. And we'll see some companies that have done that pretty successfully. So we talked about the fact that users know exactly what you're doing. So by the way, I'm an iOS developer. So this talk is going to be focused a lot on iOS. Most of these topics have a very similar parallel in Android. I'll mention some of them when I can, but really I did think about all these points in the aspect of Android as well, and they're all pretty valid. It might be a little bit of a different method to check everything on Android or to look at it, but it's definitely possible. But this is just the world that I'm living in for the last 4 years, which is why most of these examples are going to come from there. So anyone familiar with this screen on iOS? Okay, it was added pretty recently. I'm not sure if in iOS 7 or iOS 8, but you can know exactly which apps are eating up your battery life. And I check this often. I look at this, and if I see whoever app is, so if I use Waze, I understand why it's taking a lot of battery. I understand that I'm driving. It's constantly calculating my. It's,
a lot of choice.
Right. That's if you're going to use Waze, you don't have any choice. That's the price. It's gonna eat your battery because of the network connection, because of the GPS. But otherwise, this is something that would be very irritating to me. And the end users know this, and the developers know this, and everyone. It's something that you have to be aware of. The same thing about cellular data. Okay, this is a similar screen. You know exactly which apps are using your data. I cleared my data a while ago because this screenshot doesn't look that bad. I mean, 1.6 megabyte for Airbnb is not too bad, but I've definitely seen apps that use hundreds of megabytes, and I've turned off several apps which were violent. So don't kill the battery. That's probably the most important thing. And the things that affect battery are, one, how much networking you're using. The most expensive operation for a mobile phone is turning on and off the cellular data in the phone. So every time you're making a network request, you're doing something that's very expensive, and you really need to think about how you save this as much as possible. And that's something that we really focus on at LivePerson, really think how to minimize that and how we can save the number of these operations. And it's something that really affects the battery life. Be thrifty with cellular data. So again, cellular data is something that's very expensive for these users, and something that you need to think how you minimize it on your side. So the first thing you need to ask yourself when we're talking about networking and data is, does your SDK need to be real time? Do you really need to constantly turn on and off and make these networking requests? Most likely, you don't need to. Most of the SDKs that I present and most APIs are more about collecting information from the mobile phone. A few examples here. If it's Mixpanel, Localytics, Crashlytics, which the first two are analytics that really collect analytics from your phone. Crashlytics, which is collecting crash reports from your phone. They don't need to be real time. You can send, so these are collecting information every second. You can send them at any point, but you can also do some smart batching. Batch these into larger requests, send them once every minute, once every 2 minutes. Send them when the app is backgrounded. Send it when the app relaunches after a session. There's a lot of different things that you can do to really make this more efficient. So the main takeaway here is really look at the different API calls that you're making And do they really need to be real time? Do I really need to report an event every time it happens? Most chances are you don't. So that's really something that can save a lot of data and battery power for your users. The other option is real-time APIs. LivePerson, that's exactly what we're about. We're about allowing you to immediately chat with an agent based on your behavior inside the app. So we want to offer you chat at the exact right moment. So if you're going into a certain view and you have a certain amount of items in your shopping cart, and we know something about your behavior, where you're located, anything like that. So we want to offer you chat at that exact moment and really grab your attention. So we do need to use a real-time API. Firebase is another example. I mentioned them before. They're a back-end service which allows you to really stream and update information from your back-end and from your phone in real time. And one of the things that you really need to think about is if you do have a real-time API, how are you going to do it to really save battery and data and use the network as little as you can? So these are some of the methods that you can use to really transfer information between your phone and your backend. Polling is the classic method. Let's say you want to collect for, let's look at LivePerson's SDK working with our API. We constantly want to know if there's an engagement waiting for the developer. Okay? Or if it's Firebase, Firebase wants to know if there's information that's waiting to be updated in the client. So you can make HTTP requests to the API every 10, 20, 30 seconds and collect this information. So this is the worst thing that you could do in terms of battery life. It's a big no-no. If you're doing this, you're doing it wrong. And I mean, you can always find an optimal interval for polling, and it's something that can work. Definitely something that you can improve. Another option is long polling, which is basically making an HTTP request and keeping it open until the server has new information to provide to the client. So the HTTP request is open. Once the server has something new, it pushes it back, and then immediately another request is made by the client. There can also be a timeout set here. So here you're really you're always making a request. You're making more requests than maybe you'd like, but you're not making one every interval. You're still doing it every time you need data. So this is definitely something that's more optimal. Something that we did with our SDK is use a protocol, HTML5 supported protocol called SSE, Server Sent Events, which is basically, it's a one-directional protocol. So you subscribe to one endpoint on the API, you open one connection, and you're constantly receiving events on that connection. So the pink arrow is the connection that I've opened, and I'm constantly getting data on this SSE. Connection. So it's one-sided. I'm not able to send any data by myself. So that is done by making separate post requests to the backend. But at least I'm making the post requests when I do have information that's relevant. If we put it together with the batching that we mentioned before, you can make a minimum amount of these calls if you're smart about it. And this is something that we really did a lot of testing. We also read a lot of research about it. We did testing, and we really saw that there's a huge impact on battery life when you use something like that as opposed to polling. So if this is something that's constantly running within your developer's SDK, you really want to make a good decision here and have your backend support this stuff and work with it well. The last option is Websockets. Websockets is a fairly new connection method. It comes from the web, not from mobile, and it really allows you to open a duplex connection with your server and transmit information back and forth as much as you can, as much as you want. In this case, the connection is open all the time, which really, in terms of the battery use that's caused by switching the mobile radio on and off, you're really saving a lot of power here. In terms of the data size, you have a lot less headers that are involved with making HTTP requests. So you can really only focus on the data that you really want to send between your SDK and your backend. So this is something that we've really looking at as a very efficient way for building a mobile app and building a mobile SDK and focusing on it. And I think we're going to see a lot more apps using WebSockets as their main connection method as we go along. And again, it's something that we've tested in real life. We've really looked at the various battery levels and read research about it, and it definitely really makes a big difference in terms of both of the battery and the bandwidth used.
On the server side, to do SSC or WebSockets, can you do it with a regular HTTP server, or you need some other kind of server?
For WebSockets or for SSC?
For either.
For SSC, it's a regular.
HTTP server?
Yeah, and for WebSockets also, you need a server that supports WebSockets. I'm a client-side developer. If anyone wants to chime in on the server-side stuff, but there's a lot of implementations for that around, and it's something that's very easy to grab and use, supported by a lot of the bigger server-side stuff. Yes.
If you want to use SSE, that means that your phone needs to be connected to the internet all the time. But phones are not connected all the time.
Definitely, that's a really good point. So that's something that I did want to mention here as well. Anything you do, you really need to take into consideration when your phone is when the phone is connected to the internet and when it's not. It's something that you can easily monitor within your app, and you really need to build all the logic in your app around that. And if we talked about batching events before, obviously you want to, if the network is down and you're collecting events while the user is using the app, you have to batch them and send them up later. If it's a real-time SDK, then you're kind of in trouble. If it's chat, then if there's no internet, the chat will be disconnected. In our SDK, we offer a reconnection method that once chat can be interrupted, you'll get a visual indication that the chat's interrupted, and you can if you reconnect the network, you'll reconnect if you do it in a certain amount of time. But when you design your SDK to work with SSE and WebSockets, you definitely want to think about how you're reconnecting, how you're continuing the same session, how you're continuing, in our example, the same chat. If it's Firebase, you want to give the developer an indication that their data is not fresh right now, because if they let's say they're showing scores of NBA games, so you want to give them some kind of indication that the scores are not up to date. But once the network connects, really update it when you can.
Have you considered regular sockets? Because WebSockets actually depends on the WebKit or a web engine. It has consumption in terms of memory and overheads.
So
you don't have really the granularity that you want to control every issue in the socket.
So it's a good question. We did our first solution. We've actually used regular sockets in the beginning. Later on, we used polling, SSC, and now we're moving to. So we've really tried all the different methods here. With the regular socket, you're using your own proprietary protocol, and you might run into a lot of problems on the way. So for example, with WebSockets, there was a time like network operators used to monitor like WebSocket traffic and block them. So once you're using something that's standard, then you can avoid those kind of pitfalls. There's a lot of like optimization going around that. So we'll talk about third-party code, both in the back end and in the server and on the client side. So if it's a protocol that a lot of people are working with, then they're investing a lot of effort into making it work well. They're making it more secure. Okay, they're building protocols over it that could be useful for you to use. So, and there's a lot of overhead we're not using a browser, right? You mentioned it is if WebSockets are intended for browsers and for the web, but when you're doing mobile, you're using a native implementation that's supposed to be as efficient as possible. So.
What about the APN?
Excuse me?
Apple push notifications.
We're going to talk about that later. If I don't, then remind me.
How do different methods affect the overall data usage?
So I didn't show an actual graph here because it really varies according to the usage. I'll give you a real number. I'll have to get back to you on that. But we really saw like the difference in battery life. It can be up to, I think, if I remember correctly, it could be like 60% even if you're using the sockets versus polling. And data usage, again, it depends on exactly what you're sending. But I think you're really gaining, like you'll gain a similar advantage, similar benefits from not just from the overhead of HTTP if you're using WebSockets. But I'll give you I know you personally, so I'll give you a good answer about that later.
If your polling is, let's say, 2 minutes long, I guess it's still
Yeah.
better than WebSockets.
I agree. If your polling is 2 minutes long, and that's why, like when I mentioned it, if you have if it's not like 2 minutes is not real time. So you can batch the request, and that's the best thing you get. But I'm talking about like a real-time API. So I'm glad about all the questions. This is like one of the most important things that we're considering, and one of the most important things that we've learned. So the questions are really, like I think a lot of really good questions about this, and definitely something that you want to consider. The other side is really keeping your payloads as small as possible. So one of these things is inherent. Part of this is inherent in the protocol, as we mentioned. If you're using WebSocket, you're already saving a lot of the overheads that are involved with HTTP. The second part of it is really on you as a developer and whoever's building your backend API to really design something that's as lean as possible. So you're deciding exactly how much information you're sending. You're designing the size of your payloads. So really something that you should build your API to be. Let's say your API is not intended for mobile. Let's say it's something that you want like web developers have been using forever. There's a good chance that it's not as optimized as it can be for mobile. And you really need to look at it again. And are you sending events exactly when you need? Are your payloads as small as possible? So really look at that and make it as minimal as possible. The next topic I want to talk about is memory. So do you guys know how much memory like the latest smartphones have? Anyone? Right. So like the 6 Plus, 6 gigabytes. The generation before, I think the 5 had like half a gig, and before that 200. Like, so it's getting close to like modern laptops, but it's still not there. The apps are presenting a ton of information. I mean, if you go into, there's super media rich. There's a lot of images being shown there. There's a lot of information there. So you definitely want to make sure that your app uses a small amount of memory as possible. Why do you guys think it's important to use a small amount of memory? Does anyone have some experience with this?
Because your app's sandbox has not even a tenth of the memory that the phone has. And once your app reaches over that memory, you get just crashed by iOS.
Exactly. I'm sure that a lot of you are more technical and you know this, but when you go back to an app on your phone, especially true on iOS, but also on Android, a lot of times your app will relaunch. Maybe the developer saved your state and you'll get back to the exact place that you were in the app, but your app has actually stopped working completely and is being restarted. It's not the end of the world, but again, if you're an app developer, you can say, I don't care if the app, I'm using a ton of memory, I don't care if the moment someone backgrounds my app, it'll get kicked out by the operating system. But if you're building an SDK, you have to pay attention to that. So luckily, I'm not sure how it is for Android. Maybe someone can chime in, but for iOS, you really get an exact picture of how much memory your app is using. It's something that you see in Xcode. Xcode is the developer environment for developing for iOS. You see exactly the amount of memory that your app is using at any time. And if you're developing an SDK, you're always running your SDK inside of some kind of demo app, and you're seeing exactly what the memory footprint is. And Xcode gives you a bunch of these very strong tools, part of a suite called Instruments, that you can really analyze the memory usage, and you can really see exactly which objects and which things are using memory in your app. So there's no excuses here. You know exactly how much memory your app is using, and you're responsible for that. I hid it here just because I didn't want to expose all our code, but you really see exactly what is being used for that. Performance. With mobile, especially with iOS, also with Android, one of the most important things that your end users are noticing is how fast your app is. That's what mobile is all about, right? Like ever since Apple invented the touchscreens and making everything so interactive and smooth, if your app is not fully interactive, I mean, the developers here, if we see the smallest amount of delay somewhere or something that doesn't animate, like the app is automatically considered second grade to us. So maybe we're kind of a little bit extreme, but I think that everyone's expecting apps today to be super performant. And again, Xcode and Instruments provide you a complete insight into exactly where this is a time profiler, so exactly which parts of your app you're spending time in. What are the expensive things that you're doing? And this is something that you constantly have to notice and see if it's worth the price. For example, if you saw the demo of our SDK before, So we're blurring the background of the app. Like when you go into chat, we're blurring the background and then showing our UI over that. That's something that's like a very nice touch that I'll talk about later as well. We're really happy that we did that, but that's something that it is a little bit more expensive in terms of performance, but something that we try to optimize as much as we can, and also decided that it is something that's worth the hit in performance. But definitely something that you want to profile and notice. So this is instruments. You see there's a bunch of things that are relevant for us here. Allocations is how much memory you're using. Leaks, memory leaks that's something that if anyone doesn't know what memory leaks is, if you're not managing your app's memory correctly, this is especially true in iOS. In Android, this is less relevant.
These costs normally convert directly to Android, or they vary too much? What do you think?
Most of them are pretty. You mean the things that are going to be expensive in terms of performance? They're going to be the same for both of them. Yeah, definitely. So allocations, memory leaks. You definitely don't want to be leaking memory, which is mismanaging memory and causing part of the memory that you're responsible for to be unusable by the operating system, by the app. Energy diagnostics, showing you which parts of your app are using up energy. Core animation. So animation is obviously another thing that takes up a lot of the battery life and is responsible for your performance of your app. So you can see exactly which animations are running and their prices. And time profiler is what we said before about seeing where your app is spending time. Automated build process and testing, and don't crash the host app. So one of the probably the worst thing that you can do with your app, with your SDK, is to crash the app. The worst experience a developer has, we talked about battery, we talked about networking. If your app crashes, if your SDK crashes while the app is using it, that's like that. I mean, that's not even something that you'll get. It's worse than getting kicked out. You'll get like angry emails from the developer, and we'll recommend others not to use your app. This is something that you have to make sure that you're not doing at all. There isn't any method, like other than writing good code and knowing what you're doing and really taking everything that we're talking about into consideration. There isn't any one way to avoid these crashes. A service like Crashlytics that we talked about is great for a developer that has an app in the App Store and you can really collect the crash reports. For us as an SDK, if we collect crash reports from our developer apps, it's kind of problematic. We're like collecting sensitive information. We're not supposed to be there at that point. Once the SDK is in their app, they're supposed to do it themselves. And plus, there's, again, another overhead of networking and data here. But the only way to do it is to really have a very orderly process of automatically building your app and testing it. And this is something about the build process, something that we've really done from day one, making sure that we know exactly how our SDK is built, and then testing it from that build and releasing it that build. And automated testing is something that we've done to a certain extent, and we're doing more of it right now. But we like our SDK, this is something that we just spend a ton of time on and really make sure that it doesn't happen. And happily, like we've never had a developer come to us and say our app is crashing. Something that's very important. Okay, permissions. Everyone's familiar with this permission screen. So the different APIs that you can access from an iOS device, this is in Android, it's a little bit different. The permissions are when you are installing the app, not when you want to use them. But the permissions are something that's some of the most critical things that you can access in the app. Location services, super interesting. Photos, actually, I have the list right here now. Okay. Location services, photos, microphone, sorry? Contacts, the address book, the calendar. I'll show a list of these in a second. But if you're building an SDK, there's a really good chance that you want to access at least some of these. On the other hand, if you look at best practices for iOS apps, not if you talk about SDKs, you'll see that asking for permissions is one of the most sensitive things that you can do in an app. When this permission only comes up once. When the app asks for example, for location, you only get one chance to ask this from the user. If they say no here, then they have to go into the settings and enable it like proactively and Almost no one ever does that. So this is, the developer has only one chance to do that. And if he's read all the blog posts about how to ask for permissions correctly, and some of the best practices is to show your own notification screen before you're even asking the official operating system permission. And then if he says no, you didn't lose that chance. You still have another chance to do it. So if you're going to do it from, you know this? It's a familiar practice. So if you're gonna, they spend so much time into this mechanism, and you're gonna ask for them, then you really blew it. This is something that immediately you get thrown out.
I disagree with the never, because sometimes, for example, like open airship, you have to ask for permission to get push notifications, otherwise you lose the essence of the.
It's a good point, but who asks for? I've implemented Urban Airship in a bunch of apps. Who's asking for this permission?
Yeah.
The developer, like if you look at the Urban Airship documentation, say like in app did launch, this is how you ask for push notifications. So you're still doing it as a developer, and you can control how you want to do it.
Open as a boolean value that indicates if you, the developer, want to do it, or you allow them as Urban Airship to implement this code.
Yeah. So, like I've played with parse a little bit, and they have push notifications as well. But they still give you, if you look at their documentation, and we're going to look at it soon here, they show you how to ask for push notification permissions, and you can do that at any time. And I've used it without asking. You don't have to ask in application did finish launch. You can ask anywhere you want, and I think that's like the really good practice in any case. But definitely, you don't want to do it as an SDK. You can say that this SDK is worthless without that permission, but it's still, you're not going to be triggering the permission. That's what I'm saying.
Why not bundle the best practice inside the previous dialog asking, we're going to ask you for permission? Bundle the whole flow.
That's a good. I think that's a good idea. I think that's we're going to talk about like how much of your own UI do you add inside of the app. So I consider like your own UI, and your own UI can contain best practices. I think that's a good idea. Like that's something that we should think about. I like it. But definitely use them if they've been given. So you can always find out if the permission has already been given, and you don't even have to ask the developer if you do it. You can just find it out yourself. And if it's already there, why not grab it and use it without anyone knowing? It's depends on what you're doing, depends on your business need. But if the developer is already monitoring location, then the coordinates are there and you can use them. So that's something very interesting. This is just one example of how you can do that. Like iOS offers you to. We're not going to have a lot of code here, just because I know that not everyone's technical, and anyone who wants to know about these things can ask me directly. But you can, even if the class is not included in the project, even if that specific framework hasn't been added to the project, you can query for that class from its name. So for example, CL Location Manager is the core location manager, which brings you the latitude and longitude for the user's location. So this will return nil. This will return like a false value if the developer isn't using this framework. And once you have that, you can check what's the status right now. So you never have to ask for the status yourself. If the status is not allowed right now, you're not going to look for location. But if it's already allowed, then you can do it. Yes?
So where do you draw the line in terms of extracting info from your user's app and getting it to you? Like, I wouldn't mind an SDK reporting crashes to themselves to make the SDK better. But if I ask for my user to allow access to his contacts, and then my SDK is extracting the user's contacts for their own info, that could be kind of a
privacy breach.
So
Yeah.
is it just on a moral basis standard, or is there something that an official kind of best practice to not get this data and not this data?
Yeah. We don't do this is not the sort of thing that we do. If we do something like that, we enable the developer to decide if they want to do it. But I think, yeah, it's up to you. This is kind of like a little loophole in the Apple privacy stuff, because the developer is asking, but the SDK can do pretty much anything you want. I think there's a big element of trust in the world of SDKs in general, because you're putting someone else's code in your app. This is one example where they might abuse your user's location, but they can pretty much do, they can abuse so many other things. Like they can do anything they want in the app. So I think you really, it's important as an SDK developer, you want to have like a big company behind you. Like we have that asset behind us. Or if you're a startup, you really have to do the marketing work to make sure that you're noticed. But yeah, I think it's just like a moral, like it's the same, if you're collecting information about your user, even in an app, you can do like really bad things, right? Like with location services, and you can report them anywhere, so it's up to you. Yeah.
Speaking about trust, does LivePerson give the code if a customer wants it?
No, we don't give the code. No one's ever asked. Like I don't think that's really something that that developers are interested in. We do provide like sample projects for using our APIs directly, if you do want to do that. But our code is like our proprietary stuff that we're using versus. There's no like secret reason for it. Just like why would any developer expose the code? You mean like for review and like making sure that we're doing everything?
See what you're putting in your project.
Okay.
See what you're collecting, because if you have some privacy issues,
yeah,
the end users will come to them and not you. So we just wanted to ask.
So I think one of the reasons that LivePerson works with some of the biggest companies in the world is because we're really good at that. We really exactly because we really do things by the book, and we do comply to all these different standards. That's not something that like we as developers do that in the code, but it's something I think that company-wide is people pay attention to that. So I think that's a lot like there's a lot of, if you look at like chat for websites, there's a lot of people offering that service, but LivePerson is still really successful because we do have that like extra level of trust. I think like security is one of the biggest things that like we always talk about, and compliance and things like that. So I mean that's looking at the way the customers interact with us, it's something that's pretty it works. So. Okay, so this is one example. And this is just like a list of, we mentioned some of these before, but these are things that if you do have a permission that you can use, you can access the contact, Bluetooth, location services, the built-in Facebook, Twitter, now there's also Vimeo, there's a bunch of these like built-in social logins you can access, like you can get the Twitter handle of the user if he's approved Twitter for the app. Photos, the camera, notifications, something we'll talk about in a second. When I say photos, you can't, like this doesn't mean you can access their photos and upload all their photos to you might be able to in some cases, but it's even if you want to use like the image picker view, like we know when you select an image inside of your app, even if you want to use that, you have to get the permission from the developer. So this is something that's very interesting, and but the worst thing is don't ask for that permission if the developer didn't ask it, unless, like in our SDK, if you do upload a photo, and you'll choose that you want to upload from an existing photo, we will ask for that permission because it's really in that context. So I guess never, who said never? So it's not never, never is kind of extreme, but really only in a very specific context where it's really clear. And it's not the end of the world also if you don't want, it's not like location, if you kill a location for an app, you really like messed up their business. I think some of these are not as important. And again, users know exactly what your app is doing. You can see exactly which apps are using location services. So again, don't do it, Hernan, per your question. Don't, like, if you're going to collecting locations, then they know it. So don't do it. Okay, push notifications. What's your name, my friend? So this is a really interesting topic because push notifications, both in iOS and Android, are a huge part of the user's experience. Basically, when they're not in the app, that's the only way you can, almost the only way you can get their attention. That's abused sometimes, but it's something super interesting. But if you want to send push notifications, first of all, you need a server-side solution that really supports that works with Apple Push Service or Google GCM, exactly. So first of all, that's an additional effort that if you want to do it, you can, but it really has to be related to your business model. We don't offer that right now, but it's something that we're considering doing if we find like the relevant value. Second, there's like another layer of trust here, because basically to send a push notification, you're giving us or the other provider, you're giving them your certificate, they can access the push service in your name. They can basically send push notifications to all of your users. They're going to need a specific token for each user, but really you're giving them a lot of power here. So this is something that it really has to be part of your business model. For urban airship, that's what they're offering, right? That's like a big thing. They have to do it. For Facebook, not really. It's not really a good use case here. For LivePerson, we're somewhere in the middle and something that we're considering. But something interesting that we do use, and is this is another little gotcha that you can use. So local notifications are, you can do the same thing in Android, right? You can present a notification even if it didn't come from GCM. You can do it in iOS. And they look exactly the same. They provide the same functionality. And as long as your app is running in the background, you can create a local notification that will appear in the phone. So what we do with our SDK is, if the connection is still open, for example, the WebSocket is still open from the SDK, you background the app, and we can still maintain, iOS will allow you to maintain a network connection for, say, 2 minutes. Then we can still create local notifications and bring the user back to the app. Again, only if the developer has already asked them for that permission. We're not going to pop up that permission ourselves, and we can't present it if it's denied, but it's definitely something that our customers love this feature because they get this nice capability without having to implement push notification. So it's pretty cool, even though it's limited. App size it's not as big a thing as it used to be, no pun intended, but it used to be that apps are limited to 20 megabytes for download over the cellular network. So if your app was over 20 megabytes, you couldn't download them over the cellular network, and you'd see app developers scrambling to make sure that their app is smaller than the 20 megabytes. Now it's up to 100. It went up to 50 in May 2012. Then it went up to, that's what we wanted to say. Then it went up to 100 in last year. It's not a big issue, but still. Developers this number is visible in Xcode. Everyone knows. I think that there isn't an app developer that doesn't know how big their app is. And if your SDK is adding a lot of a size, it's another strike. I'm not sure that people will kick you out immediately after that, but why even go there? So check how much your app is adding, and we'll talk about one of the things that affect that in a bit. Okay, local storage and security. So first of all, as you have, when you're developing, for each app that's on your phone, it has its own sandbox, its own file system that the app can use and basically store any information that it wants there. As an SDK, you have access to that same file system. So you can store any file that you want over there. You can read the files that exist there. And you can use that for improving the user experience. You can use that for, if we discussed batching, so you can save some information locally to the file system and then use it, send the crashes on the next launch. So it's definitely something that's useful, but don't use it if you don't have to, because it's something that's very easy to, anyone who gets hold of the device can really easily go into that file system and grab that information. And something that you're really responsible for as a developer, and you should notice.
So if you need to batch, don't do it in the file system, do it in the database?
A database is the same. So there's no difference between.
If you need to batch, do it, right? If
you need to batch, if it's critical for your app, you should do it, and you should not store any sensitive information there. So, that's basically the next point. If you do have to, if it is something that's relevant to the business need, then take good care of that data. Encrypt it. Don't store, if you're saving crash reports, there's various ways of anonymizing them and making them much less interesting than, you don't have to include all the private information about the user in your crash report if you have access to it. If you're using the hack that we discussed before and you have their Facebook ID, you don't have to include it in the crash report, for example. If you're doing some kind of logging mechanism and you're saving logs from your own API for presenting it to the developer for your own getting feedback on your own service, just take good care of it and be aware that it's right there and anyone can access it, basically. Encrypt sensitive information, what we just discussed, and purge it when you're done. Make sure that you know exactly when this information is not relevant and that you delete it. Sometimes people are very smart about when to save the information, but not about when to delete it. So if you do batch these things for Crashlytics, make sure that once you've sent them, then you delete them. And of course, always use SSL, always use like the top secure, whatever top secure encryption method for the connection is recommended. One of the big questions that people ask me and that we've come across is, should you use open source code or external libraries and frameworks when you're building your own SDK? So this is kind of divided into several different parts. So one problem is, how much do you trust, like we talked about trust before, so how much do you trust these external frameworks that you're using? So if you're just grabbing a project off of GitHub and you're throwing it into your application and you don't know who's doing it, you don't know what the code is in there, so you might be injecting malicious stuff into their app. So that's something that, again, it's common sense. I put AF networking here. It's got like 19,000 stars on GitHub. It's the most popular repository. It's being used by almost every app out there. We don't use this, by the way, but just as an example, this is something that you can feel safe using in your code. If you see a repo with 2 stars that was committed to 5 years ago and say, oh, this solves my problem, and you just put it in your app, that's obviously bad practice. Another problem with iOS is namespacing. So if you add AF networking to your project, to your SDK, and your developer has also added AF networking to their SDK, there's going to be duplicate symbols coming from both of these. It could be even worse if they're using different versions of AF networking, and it's really a big mess. So don't use it if you don't have to. If you do have to use something, you must use, there's no other choice, and I'll talk about one reason why you would do it. You should make sure that you add, you change the namespace for that code. You can add your own prefix or suffix to the namespace. It's kind of a headache. It's not fun, but we've done that in the rare cases when we did need to use external code. When is it good? If you are, let's take the example of the Websockets. Okay, so there's no native implementation for Websockets in iOS or in Android. If you want to use Websockets, you're going to have to either implement it yourself or use open source code that does that. Probably if you implement it yourself, you're going to cause much more trouble and problems than by using that open source code. So there's always a fine line. Something so important that you do want to use open source code for. Of course, you have to respect all the licenses, and that's obvious for anyone developing any app. OS version compatibility. This is really big because iOS, a new version comes out every year in June, and the changes are breaking. They're really Apple doesn't care. We want to go forward. We don't care about what happened before, and we're offering new stuff, and we want our developers to adhere to that. And most developers are happy about that. They can, we're going to support iOS 7 and up, iOS 8. Cool. So iOS 8 has 70% of the market, or 67% of the market. iOS 7 has 30%, and 6 is 1%, and 5 is, 0.1%. But so the developer can say, I don't care. I'm going to address 80% of the market. I'm going to go with iOS 8 only. I'm going to make my code super clean, work only with the greatest and best APIs. As an SDK developer, you don't have that privilege. Okay? You have to, first of all, think what your customer is going to support. So there's also common sense here. Supporting iOS 5 right now, we support it right now. That doesn't make, we're going to change that soon. That doesn't make much sense. But supporting iOS 7, obviously you have to support iOS 7 right now if you're building an SDK. iOS 6, probably not, but if you have big customers that really want, so if a customer has 100 million of their own customers, 1% of that is 1 million people on iOS 6. So it's a good question on where to draw the line. This can be a real headache. When Apple moved from iOS 6 to 7, they really broke really basic things in UI, and we're an SDK that has its own UI, as I mentioned before, so it can really be a nightmare supporting both of these. It's one thing, it was hard for a lot of developers to just upgrade their apps for iOS 7, but really maintaining interoperability is really hard, and that's one of the things you need to consider when you do your own UI. But we did put a lot of effort in that, and it's possible to do it. It's not impossible. It's just a lot of a headache. So this is basically me, the day after the new iOS is released. There's so many great stuff being released by Apple. When you're an app developer, the first thing, during the summer, all the iOS developers are just trying the new things and writing tutorials about it. And developing SDK is okay, I'll wait for 2 years when our minimum is iOS 7 and you can support it. So this is just personal sadness for me. The same thing goes with architecture. So, for example, Apple added 64-bit compatibility. The new devices, the 6s and the 5S, I think also 64-bit. Yes, it was. And even before that, the phones have different architecture. So there was ARM7, ARM7S, ARM8, 64-bit, and your SDK needs to support all of these. This is part of the build process. This is your code. Your code should support like the 64-bit, but this isn't. This is if your code supports 64-bit, it supports everything up to it. So that's not the issue. But when you do the build process, you have to actually build it these different slices for each of these different architectures. When you compile, let's take the simulator for example. There's a simulator when you develop for iOS in Xcode. There's a simulator that runs your code, and if you don't, when you like build your SDK by default, it won't build like the slice for the simulator. You guys ran into that? So you have to explicitly, like you have to build the each of these slices. There's a tool called LiPo that connects them into like it's called a fat binary that connects all the different slices into one binary, and then it just works for everyone. And it'll be bigger. Like your library is going to be much bigger than your app actually needs, but your app will only take the parts that are relevant for your SDK once it's built. So that's something that you can use. Excuse me? 64-bit?
No, it's obvious. LiPo built that library.
So when you build for the App Store in Xcode, it'll automatically build. There's an option in the build settings for support, like which architectures do you want to support, and when you like the release scheme for you have to support all the architectures. So that's something that.
Regarding the emulator target for App Store.
Exactly. That's exactly.
That's something that if you include emulator built binary into flat target, so there can be some problem with App Store.
When the developer compiles their app for the App Store, it doesn't take the simulator. It only uses it when you're running the simulator. But you don't want, like, this is something we did run into. We had a mistake when 64-bit, so one of the developers contacted us, we can't run it on the 64-bit simulator. That's because we added 64-bit support, but the simulator had a different, there was a different slice for the simulator in 64-bit. So we missed that. Really quick fix one day, but still, this is something that you have to notice when there's a new architecture that comes out. So I moved to the next slide without noticing. When will the developer upgrade the SDK? So much later than you'd like. When we release a new version, we're like, okay, yeah, all the developers are going to integrate it tomorrow. Not really. It can take like a year. It can take more. They can never upgrade it. They might upgrade their app 100 times, but anyone who's integrated in a different SDK here knows that it takes 5 minutes to integrate and you're happy with it, but then when are you going to go to the website and do it again? Only when you have to, like when it doesn't work. You're not going to proactively do that. But there are ways to help a developer. Talk about it in a second, but definitely design your APIs for the long run. Like when you build your APIs, consider that there's going to be apps in the wild that are using them for 1 year in advance, 2 years in advance. So really every decision that you make is expensive because you're going to have to be supporting these apps for the future. You can always like fail gracefully. So you can have, at some point we're not going to support SDK version this and that, and you have to force your developers to upgrade. But don't have like I closed the API and now like the apps are crashing. That's definitely not what you want to do. So you still have to think about what you're doing. Okay, so back to what we talked about. I'm going to go a little faster right now because a few more things to cover. Back to what we discussed in the beginning. Make it easy to integrate and use. So instant onboarding is a must. Okay, we talked about those 5 minutes. You have to be able to like just hop on a website, register immediately, get like that email approval, get a token that you can pop into the app, download the SDK, boom, and have it working in 5 minutes. If you're like your company or you as an entrepreneur, you have to like really look at that process end to end and make sure that there's nowhere that you're losing any developers. You have to offer a free trial because if one of the things that you need to do is put in a credit card, then you know how these things work. Like maybe my manager told me to try out this SDK, and I'm not going to pay for this. Or okay, wow, this costs money. Okay, there's a free one. I'm going to use that. Obviously you want to make money from this, but you really have to know when to ask for payment. And like if you look at some of these SDKs, you get a free tier up to 10,000 monthly average users. Once you cross that, like it starts being expensive, but you're already invested. You have 20,000 users using that SDK in their app, so that's when you can really make money. So it's a win-win thing here. Interactive documentations are really cool. This is what Parse does. We mentioned them before. So the docs are not really a doc. It's like this website that you're interacting with. You can, I want to implement social, analytics, push, data. So you can really just tap into that. I want to do it for, right now they support everything, as you can see. So I want to do it for mobile. I want to support iOS. So IR, Objective-C. I have an existing project that I want to put it in. Okay, this is the really easy instructions. The code snippet that we're going to get here right now, okay, faster, already has like our token built into it. So when you're every developer is going to be copy pasting this code into their app, but this is actually copy paste that's going to work. So when I use this for the first time, I'm like, this is the industry standard. Everyone has to do this. This is the only way to do it. So I think that it's a lot of effort, but it's worth it. And you see there's this button, test this SDK. So one of the biggest things is like, I'm not sure, like this is me like half the times. I integrated the SDK. The code is running, but did I really integrate it? Like, did it work? So you have to have some place where like a really clear point where the developer goes and says, yes, the SDK was integrated. So in the demo that we saw before, there's like a test button. You just test and say, yes, this worked. No, it didn't work. Why not? Troubleshooting. So you have to do that, I think. It's really, really important. I've had a ton of SDKs where like, okay, I reported a bunch of events for the analytics, where is it? And then 10 minutes later, it'll pop up, but I'm already frustrated, so important. Use Cocoa Pods or dependency managers, other dependency managers for Android. Sorry? Gradle, exactly. This is Gil, one of our developers. He was just telling me today that a friend of his told him, like, if an SDK doesn't use Cocoa Pods, it's like I'm not even going to try it. Like I'm not even going to give it the 5 minutes. And I feel pretty much the same because it's become such an industry standard and it's so comfortable that you have to support it. So you see, this is a pod file. This is the file where you define like which dependencies you're automatically going to integrate into your app. So it's just like pod LivePerson version 1.5.448, boom. That does everything. That integrates like all the related frameworks that we need for the application. It can't write any of the code like we talked about before. You still need to have like a basic snippet of code to actually launch it, but you can do almost everything else. You can include assets, bundle, anything like that. Really cool. Must do it. Same for Gradle, right? In Android. If you don't do Cocoa Pods, really you have to have most minimum integration is to drag a bunch of frameworks that are required by your project. If you're using core location, if you're using audio, whatever, just make it just that, and then just drag the SDK. That should be like what you need. The launch, don't make it complicated to launch. Okay, just have one method, one command that the developer needs to put in. You need to, if you have these permissions, if you have these various types of logic, just put it in there. You can have more customizations, you can have more stuff that they can do, but make sure that it's like one line, like there's a singleton object that you use, and you just launch the app with its app ID, and that's it. That's the industry standard, and you have to adhere to it. Developer logs this is not a must, but it's really cool. Everyone uses logs. This is super useful as a developer to troubleshoot. Why not provide the same insight to your developer? They're already looking at their console. Why not report like various problems and help them integrate? We don't do enough of this, to be honest, but like we'll show you a warning if things are really not working. But this is something that's important to help the developer. Use the right kind of callbacks. You can set, this is iOS standards, but there's something similar for that in Android. Let them specify a delegate to get notification about various lifecycle events within the SDK. Things like for us, when we present the chat, when we hide the chat, all these different things, we're notifying the developer of this. So maybe they want to do various things to work with that. So we definitely want to do that. send notifications when you really want to broadcast messages about things that you're doing, let them set blocks for completions on various events. These are all very cool stuff. One of the biggest questions is there's a lot of configurations for an SDK. There's a lot of different options that you can configure. And do you do it on the client side or do you do it on the server side? So there's no right answer here, but just something to consider. If you do it on the server side, what's nice is that the developer doesn't have to do it. You can give the manager access to the backend, and they're going to be exactly, okay, the manager is going to be setting everything that they want. It doesn't have to be everything on the developer. And another nice thing is that you can change these things in real time. Let's say you tried something and it didn't work, so you want to change it next week without shipping a new version of the app. You can just change it on the server side. So what's the, you just ran into that? So this is cool. On the other hand, it's kind of tricky. Some things like the developer really like we talked about testing before, you want to test it with a specific configuration. So that's a big advantage of doing it on the client side. Sometimes you can't do it on the server side. Sometimes the configuration that you want to offer is to let them design their own custom view and like really give a UI view object, for example, and pass it to the SDK. So that's something that you have to pay attention to. We talked about keeping the SDK updated, so the best way to help them is if you do CocoaPods, they can just change the version number and get it updated. If you host your SDK on GitHub, they can just pull the latest version and automatically upgrade. So just do these little steps that'll make it easier for them. Okay, this is the last topic, so thanks for being a great audience, but this is, we're nearing the end, but this is very interesting. Should your SDK include UI? I mentioned this quite a lot, but UI is great. UI is a big part of the app. A lot of these different SDKs that we've discussed can offer, they have a business reason to offer a UI. So with LivePerson, we're offering chat and campaigns and engagement. And if we can actually give you the UI to do that, there's a much bigger chance that you're going to use it and do it well. Spotify, they have an SDK. They can actually give you like a player. I'm not sure if they do that, but they can actually give you a player to play the music. PayPal can give you like a payment screen. Twilio, which is an API for like telephony, so they can really give you an SMSs. They can really give you an SMS screen. Facebook and Twitter offer UI for login, and Twitter is doing like a lot of other cool things right now, like single sign-on with your phone number. Never mind. Localytics has some UI for campaigns. Layer, which is another chat API, can offer that. So we personally think it's like a huge advantage of our SDK, and we think it's a good idea. It's really driven the adoption of our SDK, but it's definitely a good question. If you're not going to offer UI, you can still offer Plan A. You can offer like a very UI-friendly API. You can imagine that your developer is going to build, like this is the example here is obviously chat. You can imagine that your developer is going to build their own chat UI and really offer the best, from your experience building chat stuff, you can offer the best callbacks to, did receive message, did receive notification, anything that you want to do, send message, and just make it as friendly as you can so they can really easily put it into their the app. The other thing is you can do is you can offer a view controller or an activity in Android and tell them, this works, this is standalone, it works. You can just present it however you want. This is kind of like somewhere in the middle because on the one hand, you're not interfering with their app. You're not like taking over stuff. You're letting them decide where your UI will appear. But it's still something that they need to do a little bit of work for. They still need to present it, and it's not like an integral part of their app. So this is a good question. And what we do is really some kind of extreme. So we have our own UI, and we don't even give the view controller to the developer. We just have like, if we have the button that we saw before on the screen, they can just tap that button, and they can just, like chat takes over their screen. Even the button like kind of takes over their screen. They don't have to, they can disable that as well, but when they do like start the chat or start the engagement, we like overlay it over the app. So this is a good question. Like we're really happy with it, but it's really specific per SDK.
If I implement my own UI,
Uh-huh.
what kind of parameters I need to take into consideration? Like the size of the...
This is exactly what I'm going to talk about now. But let me go over these things, and if you have any questions, then let me know. So one thing you need to take into consideration is you really want to maintain the app context. You don't want the users feeling like they've been transferred to a totally different app. We were just talking about, like I mentioned, that SDKs are a great business opportunity, And we're just talking about AppsFire that were purchased this week, an Israeli SDK company that were just acquired for $30 million. So I've used I've seen their SDKs in a bunch of apps, and it's always like, whoa, this is like totally different user experience. It doesn't look anything like the app I was just in. It feels like a really foreign object and has nothing to do with the app I was with. It looked completely different, and it was like ugly. So that's why I didn't want to use it. But I like them. I have friends there, but still. So what we do, if you look here, we like blur. We keep you in the same. You're still in the app, but we blur the background. So you're really maintaining the context that like the user still feels like they're in the same app. It's, to some degree, it's still.
Yeah, but how do you know which colors to use for the bubbles?
Great question. So we offer like custom branding, and if you're doing your own UI, your own UI, you have to offer something like that. So we have this like CSS style layer, which we allow the developers to really. We kind of took. We're just talking about today. We kind of like took it to the extreme, where you can change the font and the what was like the rounded corners. You can how rounded they are. So we kind of made it a little bit too customizable, maybe. You just want to offer something that really like think of all the different things that the developer wants to offer. So obviously all the different you can change the color of anything. You can change the logos, change the icons. You can change. There's different fonts here. You can use any of the built-in iOS fonts or your own font. So and this is when we talked about configuration. Again, do you do this on server side or do you do it like in the client? We do it server side, so they can change it. But you know, definitely device and orientation support is a big one. There's like it used to be. It's really hard with Android, and it used to be easy with iOS with only one screen size. It's getting harder with the different screen sizes. There's iPads, there's iPhones. Auto layout is a great tool for that. That's again, if you can support. It started in iOS was 6 or 7. I'm not sure. 7. If you can support that, then you can. That could really be helpful in that. If not, you just have to do a lot of testing and a lot of thinking. Sometimes, you know, like with a 6 Plus, like Apple really recommends a totally different UI. For iPad, there's a different UI, so it's a lot of work, and we ran into a lot of trouble around that, yeah.
If you support auto layout in your SDK, but the developer does not support auto layout in their app, is your app going to adapt its UI automatically?
So we don't use it right now, so I haven't really looked into that, but I think that auto layout is like on per view controller level. Like you have this property does translate auto resizing masks into constraints.
Per storyboard or per nib.
It's per storyboard per nib. So you can. We haven't done it because we support iOS 5 right now, so we haven't. But we're gonna figure it out soon. So again, that's like when you're supporting different versions. It's one thing to like change the like most of the APIs that change between versions, like the really important ones, are UI related. So you can't use, like that's I was crying before, you can't use like the newest UI elements, and this is even bigger when you have your own. What about assets? UI, when you have a UI, you have to include some icons, you have to include some images. It did become easier with flat design since iOS 7. You can really do a lot of, like you don't have to include all these textures for this skeuomorphic UI. You can just have buttons with colors, and you can do a lot more. So the size of our assets came down from like 200K to 60K when we moved from iOS 6 to 7 in terms of our look and feel. Like we still, like if you're running on iOS 5 with our SDK, we'll still have like an iOS 7 look and feel. So this is really a big issue. PNG Crush, just like a little tip, if anyone doesn't know it, you can really make PNGs much smaller if you run them by this nice algorithm. One thing that we do in some cases is downloading and caching the bundle. If there's a developer that really doesn't want to have these assets included in their app, they can download it on demand. Like once the app is run, we'll grab the bundle from the CDN. Again, 60K, one-time download. We cache it locally. Not the end of the world, but this is something you can do. That's what I just mentioned. Cool. So I think what my point is, building, like I was just talking to someone earlier today, building an SDK is not the hardest thing in the world. There's like, it's basically can be very simple if you're offering something simple, and can be more complex, but there's really just a lot of things that you need to take into consideration. I think we went over, like it's a good checklist of them today. Yeah, I hope you'll take this, yes?
How do you deal with the UDID or the lack of UDID?
It's a good question. We're just talking about that today. So UDIDs are, first of all, everyone wants UDIDs. Every developer wants to identify the same user across sessions. Every SDK developer wants to identify, and this is regarding privacy, wants to identify users across apps. And Apple, or I'm not sure how it's done on Android, but they don't want you to do that. They don't want you to track, they don't want AppsFire or someone like that to track the same user across devices.
Google are also going in this direction.
Yeah.
Apple are leading, but Google.
So let's talk about before, so since iOS 6, Apple offers you two types of UUID. One is called vendor UUID. This is a specific UID specific for that installation of that app. So if you download Waze, you install Waze, you're going to get a UUID for yourself in Waze, which will be consistent across the different sessions of yourself in the app. If you delete the app and you run it again, I think that it changes. I'm not sure. When
If you reset.
or if you reset the phone, yeah.
No, not the phone.
Oh no, this is the different one. We're going to talk about that in a second. That's a different idea. So this one is great. Like this is exactly what this is for. This is like a super vanilla, safe UUID that Apple is offering you for as a vendor to. Again, it's like this is like in the contract between us and the developer.
I think that if you have two applications from the same vendor,
Yes.
you get the same vendor ID. So.
You're right. You're right. So if you have Waze, Google Maps, and Google and Gmail, you can identify users across those two platforms, and you're doing it right. You're signed up in the same Apple developer account, and it's cool. So again, this goes into like the contract between you and the developer. You're there, like you can grab. There's no permission for vendor UID.
The question is
Yeah?
not about permissions. The question is how to keep the contact with the end user.
Yeah.
If the end user deleted the app,
Yeah.
moved it and reinstalled it, you lost it.
We don't have a solution for that. We don't like this is something that Apple is really enforcing. Like when you upload a new app to the App Store, you get like 3 questions: Is your app encrypted? Are you using we're talking about the advertising UID? Yes or no? So we're not going to go head to head with Apple on that. So we're not.
What do you do using the vendor?
Yeah, we use a vendor. Yeah. And the other UUID is called advertising UUID, and this is something that is shared across apps. But the user has 2 abilities. One, he can reset it anytime you go to the settings. It's kind of hidden, like setting general advertising on the bottom, reset advertising UUID. And he can like specify that he doesn't want this UUID to be used for like retargeting, or I'm not sure, there's like a set of rules there. We did have, we used this in the past. We did have, when Apple, they changed it in March 2014 where you had to report it and you weren't allowed to use it unless you really have advertising. So we had to take that out. So definitely something that we're aware of, and yeah, we just use the vendor UID for now. Before iOS 6, you could generate your own UID based on like the MAC address of the device, but that was blocked, and now all the devices return the same MAC address when you're as a developer. So. Any other questions? Yes.
We were checking, well, let me start from the beginning. We have a web solution and we run an SDK, as most of us. And
Nice.
from the web perspective, you have JavaScript. And one of the solutions that you might consider is using some JavaScripts inside the SDK.
Okay.
So how fat is it? How performant is it? Is it something that you can consider, or it's a big no-no?
How would you use the JavaScript? Like how would you, like polling for JavaScript snippets and then run them locally on the?
It's actually a web view in the SDK.
Oh, with the web view?
No,
with the JS context.
Oh, so like run JavaScript locally on your device. That's a good question. I haven't done that. I don't know, but that's an interesting idea.
So, yeah, business logic and not UI.
Yeah. I think it would be pretty performant because the JavaScript engine on these devices is pretty strong. Apple is like giving more access to it, right? Look, there's now not just like a web view, and there's the web kit. I know you're not going to use a web view, but I think they're offering more of these capabilities. That's a good idea. I haven't tried it. But this reminds me for your question before, or about using WebSockets. So if you do, let's say you want the API to be used by, like, we also have a mobile web chat solution at LivePerson. So you can use the same, one of the reasons we went for these things, we wanted the native SDK and the web one to use the same. So yeah, that's another reason I forgot to mention before. If I'm already talking to you.
Have you considered to use your SDK as a separate process and use an IPC between it? Because then when your SDK crashes, let's say, so it will not affect the hosting application.
I'm not aware of that. How do you do that?
Like another process, and you use some XPC or another IPC.
Yeah, we'll check it out. Talk to me after. Yeah, definitely. Interesting.
Have you used any obfuscation or something like that? I assume you don't, but you must probably have an opinion about obfuscation.
Like changing all the name classes to hide like everything. Yeah, we just talked about it like this week. We didn't think about it before, and we're like, it's something that has come up, and we're considering. Why didn't we do it?
Yeah, why didn't you do it?
Why haven't we done it?
No. Why an SDK like yours wants to be obfuscated?
So security is one of the biggest concerns here, and even if you're not really doing something that isn't secure, it's like just even like blocking even like really crazy options of hacking into your SDK and doing impersonating your visitors. I mean, we don't really do like for monitoring visitors, and I guess maybe someone can hack into the chat and impersonate a visitor. It's kind of, it's not going to happen, but it's
You looked at the specific technique of the journey?
Not yet. It's something that like we had like some security discussions and something we discussed. So yeah, it's a good point.
What do you think most SDKs do not invest enough in their app examples? For example, let's talk about the Facebook SDK.
Yeah.
If you download the Facebook SDK, it has tons of documentation,
Really?
pages and pages, and then when you download the example, you're lucky if you can see an example how to log in and then bring a friend and maybe a post on Facebook, and that's the only examples that you get when you're developing. Like, it's easiest to just take a look at the example and do exactly as
Yeah.
Why do you think that SDKs don't invest enough time in the example?
So we're guilty of that as well, I think. We don't do enough of that, and like something that we're
It
trying
would
to.
also be the best way to check your SDK against a regular app. Like,
Yeah.
Right?
Offer a sample app that runs. Yeah.
That's why you have another SDK, another level of SDK that's called a simple Facebook. And they give you SDK to their SDK. Really, I'm not joking.
Yeah. I think the answer to that is product stuff is hard. We all spend so much money on like developing stuff and building cool apps, but it's really hard to know to do like create good processes that are going to be like well received by our users, and it's hard to like match everyone's taste. I think it's just hard, and people don't do enough work about it, and we're guilty of that as well. Like you have to really do a big effort. I think that Parse, like when I saw that, I'm like, wow, they really thought about this. They really like.
Yeah, but even Parse, their in-app purchase examples are like really lame.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess people are just like don't make enough of the effort. They'll do a lot about like optimizing their SDK technically, but not enough about like Facebook does so many like they really rewrite the whole UI kit or whatever, but they might not like spend enough time for that. So it's a good point. Yeah.
Taking back to something you said in the beginning about using open source and name clashes.
Yeah.
If you use CocoaPods, doesn't it prevent that problem?
I don't think it does. There's
not familiar enough with CocoaPods, but doesn't it mean that if the target app already has that library, then I will bring it in, or how does it work?
If you've run into this? Oh, you just. I'm not sure. I think it does create a different workspace, a different project inside the workspace. I think it still compiles it into, like, how does CocoaPods work? You have a different project. It creates an artifact binary from that project, and then it's used by your SDK. So I still think you're going to run into a clash there. But in Swift, iOS 8, they did add, I haven't looked into it yet because we're not working with that yet, but they did add like a namespacing solution. Has anyone used that already in iOS 8? So the solution could be around the corner in 2 years when we can do that stuff.
The question related to what you said, have you moved to Swift?
So,
do you plan to move to Swift?
So that's a great question. I think that Swift is definitely the future. I think that if we're going to have this conversation in a year, after iOS 9, 2 years, then I think that most people will be using Swift. For us, I don't think we're going to be the first people to run and adopt it. It's not as stable. There was just like a 1.2 version released last week, which people have said has really had a lot of improvements in stability. But there's still a lot of issues around it. If anyone's used it, there are a lot of crashes in the SDK even. Hernan was just talking to me about that today, that like you get like these weird source kit crashes inside of Xcode. So I think it's definitely the future, but I don't think that we're going to be pioneering. If we were like this little startup, just building a nice app for the App Store, then actually we use it for some of our apps. So the example, we use it for internal apps, but we're not going to use it for the SDK. I think there's going to be a time, like if I would have to wager, I'd say like June 2016, iOS 10. We're like, okay, yeah, now it's ready.
You're talking about writing SDK in Swift?
Yeah. Oh, we support SDK. We support Swift, yeah. I mean, we checked in, there's like a little bridge that you need to add, but we support interoperability with. Yeah, that's fine, Yeah. But we don't write our code. You asked about like writing the code, right? Yeah.
Do you think Objective-C will be deprecated?
I think in the long run, yeah. I don't think it'll be I think it'll be like maybe iOS 10 will be the tipping point, and then it'll still like hang around like iOS 7 is still 30% of the market right now, but eventually it'll be like iOS 6, so 1% of the market. I think eventually everyone will use it. I think Apple will eventually only support it. Yeah, it will be. Yes, if we want. I mean, I think you might still be able to use Objective-C, but like. It's a good question. I don't know. I think we will rewrite it. Like rewriting is healthy, and you don't want to have the same code base for 10 years, so that might be a good place to do it. But it's a good question. Like we talk about that a lot. Like when's the right time to do that? So cool. So I hope you guys are ready to go out and build. I'm happy that there are actually people that are going to go out and build an SDK right now, and I think you have like a nice list of things to consider. And again, it's not like the hardest thing in the world, but just a lot of these like edges to think about. So good luck with that. Enjoy.